Okay, let's dive into one of the most famous and maybe one of the most misunderstood tools for thinking out there. It's a principle that guides scientists, doctors, detectives, pretty much everyone who has to solve a puzzle. You've definitely heard of it, but what does it actually mean?
This line, this is probably how most of us first heard the phrase. The simplest explanation tends to be the right one. It sounds so neat, right? So clean and intuitive. But as we're about to find out, that popular definition kind of misses the real power and the real point of this incredible idea.
All right, to really get this, we've got to travel back in time, like way back, about 700 years ago. Let's start with the man who gets all the credit and figure out why on earth we call this thing a razor.
So this is the man himself, William of Ockham. And a fun fact right off the bat, Occam wasn't his last name. It was just the village in England where he was from. You know, last names weren't a huge deal back in the 14th century.
So who was this guy? Well, William was a Franciscan friar and a philosopher. And that Franciscan part is kind of important. He took a vow of poverty, which meant living with only what was absolutely necessary. And that whole idea, getting rid of the unnecessary stuff, is a perfect mirror for his famous principle. Now, he didn't exactly invent the concept from scratch, but man, he worded it so perfectly that his name got stuck to it forever.
Okay, so what's with the razor? No, he wasn't walking around with an actual blade. A philosophical razor is just a cool term for a mental tool, a rule of thumb that helps you shave away all the complicated, unneeded parts of an explanation. It's a way to cut through all the noise and find the cleanest, most logical path forward.
And now, let's get to the main event. What did William of Ockham actually say? The principle itself is so elegant, and it is incredibly powerful when you use it right.
In its original Latin, it goes something like this: pluralities non est pendenda sine necessitate. Which sounds super academic, I know, but the translation is actually pretty straightforward. Plurality should not be posited without necessity.
And what it really boils down to is this. Don't add extra assumptions if you don't absolutely have to. See, it's not really about finding the simplest answer in the way we think of simple. It's about not making things more complicated than they need to be. If one explanation works without you having to invent a bunch of new what-ifs, that's the one you should probably start with.
I know this might still sound a little abstract, but this thing has some massive real-world consequences. So let's see how it actually works using a classic example from the world of science.
Okay, picture this. It's the early 20th century. You've got two brilliant physicists, Hendrik Lorentz and this guy you might have heard of, Albert Einstein. They both came up with equations to describe space and time. And get this, they both made the exact same predictions. But here's the difference. Lorentz's theory needed this extra mysterious, unproven ingredient called the ether, this invisible stuff light was supposed to travel through. Einstein, on the other hand, his theory of special relativity explained everything just as well, but without needing the ether at all.
So, which theory do you think science went with? Yep, Einstein's. Not because it was easier to understand, it's relativity, but because it was more parsimonious. It didn't add extra stuff it didn't need. It had fewer unproven assumptions, which made it a way stronger foundation to build on. That is Occam's razor in action, right there.
But this brings up a really important question. If we always go for the explanation with fewer moving parts, aren't we just oversimplifying things? The world is a complex place, right?
Absolutely. And doctors know this well. There's actually a counter-principle in medicine called Hickham's dictum. It basically says that a patient can have as many diseases as they darn well please. It's a warning to doctors. Don't get so obsessed with finding one single elegant diagnosis that you miss the obvious. Sometimes a person with a fever, a cough, and a headache doesn't have some rare exotic disease. They just have the flu, a sinus infection, and a migraine. Sometimes reality is just messy.
And that's exactly why we need to be super precise about what Occam's razor is and what it isn't, because that popular version can really lead us down the wrong path. So let's clear up the single biggest misunderstanding right now. Okay, so let's break this down. The big misconception is the simplest explanation is true, but that's not it. The correct interpretation is the explanation with the fewest new assumptions is the one you should look at first. Another one, people think it's some kind of scientific law. Nope, it's a heuristic. It's a guide for thinking, a rule of thumb. And finally, it doesn't prove one theory is right and another is wrong. It just helps us decide which theory is the most promising one to start testing. So, here's the key takeaway. Let's try to swap out the word simplicity in our heads and replace it with parsimony. Parsimony just means being stingy, being frugal. And in this context, it means being stingy with unproven claims. Don't add them unless you absolutely have to. That's the real genius behind the whole idea.
Which brings us all the way back to the beginning. Back to that movie quote from Contact. If it's not technically perfect, why do we all remember it? Why does it feel so right? It's because it captures the spirit of the razor so perfectly. It's a fantastic shorthand for how scientists think. Look, when you're faced with two competing ideas for the same evidence, one that's grounded and you can test, and another that's kind of out there and requires you to believe in a bunch of new, wild stuff, the scientific approach is to start with the grounded one. It's not about finding the absolute truth right away. It's about finding the most logical place to begin your search.
And that's why this idea from, 700 years ago is still so powerful today. It's a tool for clear thinking. It pushes us away from jumping to wild conclusions and toward doing the actual work of investigating. So next time you're stuck between a couple of different explanations for something, just ask yourself, which one is asking me to believe the fewest new things without proof? Seriously, where in your life could you use a little shave?